Hi, I'm Layne Norton, and I'm here with Paul Revelia, and we're going to talk about how to properly execute a squat for your body type.
Show us, Layne.
So, much like with deadlift, the crucial thing with a squat is a straight bar path. Obviously hitting depth and all those sorts of things, we'll talk about that, but your most efficient squat path is going to be a straight bar path.
Efficient is safest.
Right.
It's going to carry over through all the lifts.
That's correct. And you're probably never going to have a perfectly straight bar path. And what we want to do is try to get it as close to straight as we can, okay? And so, again, just like on deadlift, our center on squat is going to be directly over our midfoot, okay? That's our center of balance and gravity, all right? So that's also going to change a lot of what your squat's going to look like depending on where you position the bar on your back and how long the lengths of your limbs are, okay? But we'll talk about that. The first thing I want to discuss, though, is the setup, okay? When we talk about efficiency, I see a lot of people, they just kind of go and unrack a bar and they don't really give it much thought.
Want to give an example of how not to unrack a bar?
Yeah, well, what we see a lot of is people just kind of go in and they'll
1 foot forward.
1 foot forward, and they kind of do the split, taking the bar out of the rack, or they don't get their feet in the proper position. It may seem silly, but if we can even improve our walkout by 10%, and that's 2% of a squat, that's still a difference it's going to make in our squat. Especially
it's less
when
energy you're expending to get in the position to squat as well.
Absolutely, and it can be safer, more repeatable. And so if we can make even if we can make our squat 1% better, 1% of a 600-pound squat is still 6 pounds. That's still more weight we can squat, especially in competition. So we want to give ourselves every advantage we can. So when we're going to unrack a bar, the first thing we want to do is, obviously when we come into the rack, is get our grip, wherever that may be, and we'll talk about different grip widths, and try to get that bar centered as center on our back as we can. So right now I'm showing a high bar position. I will show a low bar position here in a minute. And then we want our feet directly under us, okay? What happens if I have my feet in front of me and I go to unrack?
Fall backwards.
I'm going to fall backwards. I'm going to put it backwards, right? And if they're in front of me, I'm going to mash this end of the rack, right?
Yeah, and when you unrack it, you're going to have momentum throwing you backwards.
Exactly. So we're going to get this bar directly over our midfoot, or as close as we can.
Yep.
And then I'm going to simply just partial squat it out of the rack by
Squeezing
having
the hips.
here, I'm going to squeeze my glutes, drive my hips forward to unrack it. And you see how quiet that was?
Yeah.
That's exactly what we want. Now from here, we're going to initiate what's called a 3-step walkout. So it's literally 3 half steps.
Yep.
So my first step is going to separate me from the rack. My second step is going to set my foot here. And my third step is simply bringing the other foot into line with that second step. So from here, I'm ready to squat. Now I can do a little bit of shimming with my feet depending on what I want to do. But that's it. And what I see a lot of is people who, they may do this, where they unrack and they try to get as far away from the rack as they can. They're worried they're going to hit the rack, so they go, and they get all the way back here. And in this case, I actually hit the rack in the back end. Now most squat racks are bigger than this.
Yeah, this is actually a monolift. Very few locations are going to have what's known as a monolift.
Right. But even so, we don't want to have to take more steps than we need to, right? So if we're here, if we just do 3 half steps, half, half, half. Is there any way I'm going to hit that rack? There's no way.
No.
I mean, I know I lean pretty far forward, but there's no way I'm going to hit this rack.
No, and the other thing you got to consider is how close the rack is to the actual bar. So when Layne takes that first tiny step, what that does is that clears the right or the left side, depending on which foot, away from the rack. So when these things are wider on a different rack, that is a little bit more required. So you'll hear some people say, why don't you do a 2-step?
Exactly.
Well, on here, a 2-step would work. But on some racks, a 2-step will not work.
Excellent point. So a 2-step walkout would theoretically be the most efficient. And actually, we can slide these out to show you what the downside to a 2-step might be. A 2-step walkout can work, and some people do use it. The downside to a 2-step walkout is your first step cannot be straight back. It has to be to the side. You have to have lateral movement because your first step is literally setting your first foot. So a lot of times what you'll see is people will hit the rack on their way out. Right there, see? So now it can be done without hitting the rack, but it's just a little more difficult. I prefer a 3-step walkout. It's just more repeatable. It doesn't take that much more energy. I find a lot of times with the 2-step walkout, you have to take such a big first step that you kind of get off balance. Your second step, it's harder to get it in the right position. And you have to end up spending more energy just fiddling with your feet. Whereas if you just done a 3-step walkout, you could be in the same position
And
with
it
less
might
energy.
seem silly when you're warming up, but the heavier the weight gets, the more you want to use the 3-step approach, because those micro steps are going to help you keep the weight stable on your back and feel confident about the lift.
Exactly. So now let's talk about once we're actually have the bar walked out and we're set up, we're ready to start the descent of the squat. So from here, my first move is once I've got my feet in position, I bring my head up a little bit. You want a neutral head position. You hear a lot of people with the cue of look up. That is not a good idea. That's going to put a curvature into your spine and a curvature into your bar path. You don't want that. Throwing your head up is not going to allow you to maintain a neutral spine. It's not going to let you stay more upright. It has nothing to do with that. You want a neutral head position. Typically, I look slightly down. So I'm looking right across the gym right now towards the corner where the ceiling or where the wall meets the floor. From here, I'm going to take a deep breath in and brace my abdominal wall. And you can see me, I'm going to take a second to emphasize this. You can see me drive my abdominal wall out. Your abdominal wall is your body's natural belt.
A good cue, you want to explain the punch method?
Yeah, so if I was going to punch you in the stomach, you would brace for that. You would brace for that. Now, we're not talking about flexing your abs down like you're doing a crunch. I'm talking about pulling in air and then driving your abdominal wall out as hard as you can. And if you're wearing a belt, you're going to create a lot of intra-abdominal pressure, and that is going to help stabilize you. Again, this is what stabilizes you in the bottom of a squat. Telling someone to arch their lower back, if you don't have stability here, is going to be worthless. They're still going to lose spine neutrality.
And if they have the wrong leverages, it can actually be dangerous.
Absolutely.
For someone to arch their back.
Absolutely.
Someone like myself, and probably even you, if you try to arch your back, that's where injuries happen.
Yep, I'll actually get more folded over by doing that.
Correct.
So I don't ever think about trying to arch my lower back. I think about trying to drive my core out and stabilize. And if I do that correctly, I stay straight. And I have a lot of forward lean, and we're going to show that.
Yeah.
So once I've gotten my air in, I've braced my abdominal wall, I'm going to hold that throughout the duration of the movement until I finish the rep, and then I'm going to blow it out forcefully. If I'm doing multiple reps, I'll then take a new breath in at the top of that rep and then descend to the next rep and repeat it. But to initiate the descent, I think about basically two things. I drive my hips back and I drive my knees out, okay? And that's what I think about. You do not want to lead with your knees. We see a lot of people, they think about squatting down. That's not how you'd squat down to a chair. If there was a chair behind me, or if we're going to, in Mark Bell's case, if you're going to sit down in the pot for your 13th crap of the day, you're not going to sit down by pushing your knees out. You're going to sit down by pushing your hips back, right? So we want to do the same thing. We're not going to push our knees out. We're going to push our hips back. The hip joint is much more stable, much more powerful.
Mark's hip circle is actually a really good teaching tool for this. For when you descend, it actually teaches you to do things at the same time. So when my knees go out, my hips go back. It's not one, it's not this, it's simultaneous.
Right. And the reason you want to get your knees out is because if I just squat straight down and I keep my feet forward and my knees forward, I have such long femurs that I can't make space here, and so I have to lean even more forward. Where it's if I push my knees out slightly, this gets my femurs out of the way, creates space, and I can keep a little bit more upright back angle by going like that, okay? So again, I'm going to initiate the movement with a big air, bracing, drive my hips back and my knees out. And if I brace tight enough, I actually never even think about coming back up.
Right.
I'm so tight, I'm just like a spring. I just start to come back up. And I finish the movement by squeezing my glutes and driving them forward. So we'll show you what the whole thing looks like.
So when Layne takes his breath in, He holds his air by using the Valsalva maneuver. He actually puts his tongue against the roof of his mouth, keeps his core tight.
And then I would do it, take another breath and do another rep if I was doing reps. Now, that was a high bar position. I'm going to show a low bar position now because that's how I squat. I think 95% of people are probably stronger in a low bar position. So this is a high bar.
So high bar is anywhere from basically middle of the trap up. This would be like a medium high bar position.
Correct. Low bar would be next shelf down.
So low bar is basically resting
right on top of your
the
rear delts.
And you actually, if you notice right here, he's squeezing his elbows together and creating a shelf on his trap muscles right here for the bar to rest on.
So high bar, I actually get it in this position and then I go next
Pull
shelf
yourself
down.
in.
Yep. And I'll kind of move my neck to wiggle myself in. So yeah, most people are going to be more powerful, stronger in a low bar position. We talked about, like, for example, Bryce Lewis, who has really short femurs, very upright squat. He's an excellent example of somebody who's a great high bar squatter.
Right.
If I try to high bar squat, I just end up completely folded over because I lose tension. So here, I actually will start more forward with a low bar squat, but I'm able to maintain that that spine angle and that spine neutrality. You can see that I have quite a bit of forward lean. You will see that what is happening is, since I have very long femurs, I'm 5'10.5". My femur length is about the length of somebody who's about 6'2". Since I have a very long femur here, in order for that bar to remain over my midfoot, I have a short torso. I have to have more forward lean than most people. There's nothing I can do about that. That's just how my body is put together. The only way I'd be able to stay more upright is to push my knees forward, okay? And unfortunately, for the health of my knees and the stability in the squat, I don't recommend that, okay? It's okay to have a little bit of forward knee travel, but most people we know who have a lot of forward knee travel end up having quite a bit of knee problems after
especially
squatting
as frequency and volume increase.
Absolutely.
The likelihood increases of injury.
But you can watch, my spine will remain neutral and the bar will remain over my midfoot.
Good.
Now, if I tried to descend more upright, I can actually show you what that looks like.
Yep.
What you'll see is as soon as I start to apply force, the bar will come forward directly over my midfoot.
Yep.
Only now the problem is my momentum is carrying me forward.
Yep.
So since this is lightweight, I'm going to show you, but it's very dangerous if I was to do this with heavy weights. So if I try to force myself to descend more upright than my frame allows.
Using the typical kind of arch your back approach.
This is going to be weird for me to do a squat wrong.
I'll be, just to be safe.
So as soon as I got into the bottom position, that bar came forward.
The bar started to roll up and it actually placed a lot of stress on his lower back. At 135, he's strong enough to recover. Probably even up to 400 or 500 pounds he could recover. But over time, that's going to be very dangerous.
It's going to be a problem, yeah. I actually was coaching a girl over in the UK, and she was trying to descend with an upright back angle.
Sure.
Well, she was having the exact same thing happen, only her bar was going forward and her knees were going forward, right? Because she's trying to create that space to get the bar over her midfoot, because that's how you apply pressure or apply tension to the ground.
Yeah.
So I said, listen, just start out leaning forward a little bit more with that bar directly over her foot, and it immediately fixed her squat.
Yeah.
So you want to think about that line straight up and down. Take pictures from the side, videotape yourself from the side. Understand what a straight bar path looks like for you. I would love to be able to squat like a Tom Platz.
Right.
It's not in my DNA. I'm not biomechanically built like that. I squat more like a Steve Goggins, like an Ed Cohn with quite a bit of forward lean, okay? But the most important thing is I'm maintaining spine neutrality And if you're doing that, maintaining a straight back, maintaining spine neutrality, I'm not going to say you're never going to get injured, because you can do everything right and still get injured. Yeah. But it's going to minimize injury risk compared to everybody else.
Layne also has a very straight bar path. So if you view his squat from the side, the bar descends straight down and up. So that proves that he's very efficient, despite his leverages not being ideal for what some would consider, you know, a high bar squat being,
exactly,
you know, the standard.
So if you're somebody with longer legs and somebody keeps telling you just to squat more upright, your response would be, well, why don't you grow 5 inches? Because it's exactly the same thing. Yeah. It's just something you cannot do.
There are some good tools online that discuss, biomechanically speaking, you know, your tibia, fibula length.
Tom Purvis has a really great video about it. We recommend.
Yeah, so those type of things are educating some. So just it's great to be aware of those things and not feel like you have to listen to the person in the gym who is trying to tell you to arch your back and keep your chin up.
Yeah, and so there are some things you can do to make it a little bit more upright squat. For example, if you take your legs out a little bit wider, if you point your toes out, make it more like a sumo, you can do that. The problem becomes is now you're losing power because your feet aren't directly under you. So you can play with stance width and see what kind of works for you and where your sweet spot is, and kind of combining that with trying to find a little bit more upright position. You should be as upright as you can, but for everybody that's going to be a different position. Now, Paul, why don't we show yours so they can see, because Paul's very exaggerated. He has very long legs and a long torso, actually.
So I'm not even going to attempt a high bar squat because, like Layne, I have long tib fib, but I actually have also, or long femur, but I also have a long torso. So it puts me probably in a even less mechanically advantaged position for squatting. So I have to compensate by keeping the bar low at all times. So get into position. Layne and I use the same school of thought. You want to get the bar centered.
If Paul high bar squats, typically the bar will actually go over the front of his foot because he'll be so far forward.
And from here, I'll pull the bar down onto my back, creating the trap shelf. Brace, bring it straight up just by locking my hips forward. 3 steps. Now I'll brace and I'll descend by pushing my feet out and bring my hips back. So you probably noticed there I get a little more exaggerated on my lean forward. But by keeping my spine neutral and keeping the bar over the center of my foot, I'm still able to squat efficiently and safely.
Yeah, and so, I mean, that's the point we're trying to make. And you can look at pictures online of big NBA players trying to squat, and they've got so much forward lean, you know what I mean? And so understanding that not everybody's going to be mechanically advantaged, but that doesn't mean you can't squat. It just means your squat is going to look different from somebody else's, even when you're doing it right. So our recommendation is, you know, do all the cues we talk about, neutral spine, knees out, hips back, but understand that if your squat doesn't look like Tom Platz or a Mark Bell or some of the other big name lifters
Silent Mike,
you see,
I've even noticed Silent Mike
very
has
upright
a
squat.
very efficient form. You know, like he gets his knees out really well. He's able to stay pretty upright. So I think he's got really good potential for the squat. Just because I don't have as much potential for squatting as Layne doesn't mean I can't enjoy the lift and use it to my benefit. Right.
And even so, I mean, I'm not how you draw up a great squatter.
Correct.
I mean, if you were backstage at IPF Worlds, I'm the last guy you're going to pick to squat the most weight in my weight class because everybody's 3 inches shorter than me and bigger legs, right? But I think what the point is that some people may have greater potential than you, but if you work hard enough at it, you practice these cues, you can get really good at it for you. And in some cases, you may even get great at it. So stop trying to, you know, make your squat like somebody else's. Squat what is most efficient for your body type.